Hello, everyone out there. You made it. I am Abby Lehman with L3 Harris Geospatial, and this is our weekly informal screencast panel video chat discussion about everything related to geospatial and remote sensing in a world that's been rendered unfamiliar by COVID-19. This is Geospatial Distancing, and I am your informal host. Every week, I will make the same promise, which is that I am bound to get better at this eventually. Now, to get things started this week, I want to introduce you to our panelists. First up, we have my colleague at L3 Harris, Mr. Austin Coates, who comes to us from his home office in Lakewood, Colorado. Say hi, Austin.
Hello.
So he has done work in the commercial sector, but he's also done things for NASA JPL and the DoD. He's got published author status in several remote sensing publications. And it's fair to say he has extensive experience with NV and IDL, including designing and deploying NV crop science. So fun facts, when he's not on lockdown, he enjoys the typical classic Colorado pastimes like rock climbing and fishing. And during lockdown, I can attest to his high level of proficiency conducting work calls while simultaneously soothing his baby daughter. I've seen photos, I have proof. Now, next up on our panel, we have Callum Scougal from MicaSense. I told him I was gonna screw that up and I did. He originally hails from Scotland, but joins us today from his home office in Seattle, Washington. Say hello, Callum.
Hello, everybody.
So his work specializes in UAV-derived data and processing and applying that, mostly in precision agriculture applications. But he has a resume that includes GIS analyst and consultant for organizations like the UN Food and Agriculture Org and the UK Centre for Fisheries, Environment and Aquaculture. So he actually joined MicaSense in March, but because of this whole the COVID thing, he is yet to work a day in the office. So he's still feeling pretty new right now. When he's not on lockdown, he enjoys excursions to the mountains and local breweries, and he always enjoys watching rugby regardless of the lockdown. So my brief interactions with him thus far, literally met him on Monday, I can tell you two things. His accent is absolutely delightful, and his virtual background game is on point. Now, last but not least, we have Matria Grazing, which I want to introduce. She's my marketing colleague. Say hello, Matria.
Hello.
She is coming to us from her home office in Broomfield, Colorado. Now, Matria is here because she's going to be monitoring your questions as they come in, and she will be collecting them and then relaying them to our panelists to give you some really good answers. Remember that you can submit your questions throughout the call using the Q&A button in the panel right down there below. You can ask them and submit them at any time, and we'll do our best to make sure that they get answered live or what have you. So I'm going to dive in to today's topics and frame it a little bit differently than I did. So last week, we had Megan Gallagher and we had Amanda O'Connor, and they had this plethora of topics that they wanted to talk about that were very specific to types of monitoring around COVID-19. And when we started the conversation with these guys, they were like, yeah, no, you can do a lot of really cool stuff. We have no idea how to do any of it though. That's not really our specialty. So this week, we're going to take the approach of focusing on what these guys really know and love doing. And they also had not met before this week. So I went to Austin and I said, Austin, imagine that you are at a trade show meeting Callum for the first time. Because of course, one of the things that we're looking to replace by doing these weekly is the professional conversation that you have with colleagues and people from other companies, that sort of thing, at trade shows, conferences, and even just within an office. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Austin, and he can start with his questioning that he has from our MicaSense guest. Go for it, Austin.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, so like Abby said, yeah, if I were to meet Callum at a trade show, I would walk up to his booth. I know so very, very little. They have a new sensor out. It's a 10-band sensor. So yeah, I'd roll up and say, "Hey Callum, I heard that you have a new 10-band sensor. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Like, this is exciting. I love MicaSense sensors, but like what are these 10 bands and what are they going to give me?"
Yeah, so the picture behind me actually is a sample data set or an orthomosaic from one of our 10-band flights. And what is a 10-band system? I guess it's people familiar with our sort of standard sensor, the Red Edge MX. It's pretty much a duplicate of that, but it's called the Red Edge MX Blue. So you use both sensors, and each of them have 5 bands. And the new sensor has 5 bands in slightly different areas of the visible and near infrared spectrum. And that allows us to get a much better coverage of the whole spectrum for remote sensing applications, for whether that's in vegetation analysis, species identification, or crop health and things like that. So the sort of one of the really interesting good bands we have there is the coastal aerosol blue band, which is really good for looking at invasive aquatic species like reeds, monitoring, maybe stream bathymetry. We even think that, it could be used for things like estimating sediment turbidity or capacity in the river. So there's a whole host of different things you can do with these new bands in combination with our existing ones. And really, it's kind of trying to, allow comparison between your typical satellite providers like, your Landsat 8 and your Sentinel 2A, but at the spatial resolution which you get with a drone.
Sweet. So yeah, you kind of touched on the coastal blue band and looking at the image behind you. So Abby alluded to earlier, I like to fly fish on occasion. And so I'm like looking at this like, oh, that'd be sweet. I could map the river. So I've never done bathymetry, but as far as I know, so energy enters the water column, comes back out, and then there's like a log function associated with it to be able to determine the depth. But you were saying that you could also get like sediment, or you can get different aquatic vegetation and stuff. Have you seen a lot of this work done? Have there been people that have been doing stuff with this?
So for the mapping of invasive species and reeds, we haven't seen too much with the 10-band system just yet because it's just been released, but we've certainly seen people trying to do it before. And one of the things which I think is really clear is that people have been doing this with satellite data for quite a long time. And we're covering, very similar areas of the spectrum, maybe a bit narrower in some cases. But, when these guys are creating their sediment models using Sentinel or Landsat data, there should be no reason why we can't apply the same techniques and methodologies here to try and replicate that, but at a much higher spatial scale to, localized areas.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's always like the dream. So anytime I look at a Sentinel image or anything, I'm like, oh, this is a really cool feature. I'd love to go deeper. That's cool that you guys can mimic the bands, and then you can like if you owned your sensor, you go out and fly it and be like, oh, this river is very interesting to me. I can see it kind of in the Sentinel, and then go out. It's kind of like a homegrown version of tipping and queuing. Like you can get a little higher resolution spatially, and then spectrally you can match what's coming off the Sentinel sensor. Do you have an image that you could show us of the spectra itself?
Sure, if I share my screen here. We cannot share screens at the moment.
Now you can.
Let's go here. So everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can see you've got the Landsat 2A above and the Landsat 8 and the Sentinel 2A. You can see the kind of areas in the spectrum they're covering. And then you can see with the Red Edge MX and the Red Edge MX Blue, we're covering that, those two together are basically covering that same area of the spectrum.
Nice. And then also from a veg background, I'm looking at this too and going, oh, those Red Edge bands are pretty sweet. So I can never remember, and maybe Callum, or maybe even somebody on the call knows. So the Red Edge, I know that you can start to see variations in plant health just based off of the shift of the Red Edge, if it goes left or right, but I can't ever remember. If it goes right, is it healthier or less healthy? I always get them backwards. So I'm assuming if it's going right, it's getting less healthy, and if it's going left, it is getting more healthy. That's what my gut is saying. but I might.
Yeah, typically I think when plants are healthier plants will reflect more in the near infrared and less in the red. So yeah, I think as you that way it's getting healthier. But what we've got with this new sensor or new system is you've got quite a few bands centered around that red edge area. So you've got the ability to really kind of, depending on what you're looking at, trying to identify, you've got a lot of, I'll say, wiggle room to really hone in either an index which you're trying to create, or maybe you're just using the bands themselves to try and, maybe you're looking for a specific type of disease. If it responds within one of those bands, you've got some real narrow bands all in that area where it's easiest to, detect problems which might be occurring in crops or vegetation.
Nice. Actually, it just dawned on me too. So for people on the call that don't know what the red edge is, if you're looking at this beautiful graphic that Callum put up, you've got kind of goes from visible, and then like that break in between visible and near infrared. You got this steep line that goes from the red absorption feature to the near infrared reflectance feature. So yeah, that's that nice line that Callum's pointing at right now. So if anybody was wondering, what are they even talking about? That's the region that we're interested in. So yeah, plants have this beautiful feature. So anytime you're looking at it, you can be like, oh, that's a plant. I know because it's reflecting a bit of light there in the green. It's got this nice steep red edge, and then it's reflecting a ton of light over there in the near infrared. So
it looks like actually, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We have a question with regard to what we're talking about right now. Matria, do you want to relay that to them?
Absolutely. So our question from the audience is, with so many bands centered on the red edge, how will a better characterization of that slope add value to precision agriculture?
Yeah, so kind of what I was alluding to earlier, the shift actually in that position of the slope. So you can think of a healthy plant, just like what the green line is showing here. So it's got a nice flat bottom, red edge, and then kind of like that top plateau there where the near infrared light's being reflected. So if you can think of that, and then if you were to turn it kind of into this like rounded shape, so more of like something like this, that's going to be when plants become less healthy. So as this kind of floor starts to shift up, this red edge will start to shift over left and right, and then everything will kind of flatten out into this rounded shape. And that's when your plants become, well, deceased, or yeah, a lot of things can happen, but that red edge will start to shift ever so slightly, and you can see small variations in that red edge, and you can also see the flattening of the curve itself, and then you can see the absorption features starting to creep up. And so yeah, you can start to pick out many different things about your plants prior to them being visibly stressed. So you can think of a plant like starts to turn yellow. Well, hopefully you can catch that slight shift before you actually have a visual representation of your stressor.
It's such a nice way, by the way, Austin, to talk about the plants, to say that they're deceased. It's very, very elegant way to say it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, did I cover all that, Callum? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think it's just that, you want to be doing, if you're monitoring crops or whatnot, you want to be doing those flights, key stages of growth, within the growth cycle of the plants. And like Austin says, when you have all these bands of information and data, you want to be able to detect that small, subtle physiological change within the spectrum response before you're actually seeing that, whether it's a disease response or whether it's another phenomenon which is occurring.
You had another version of this, didn't you? Another version of this image, I remember you showing?
I'm not sure. I mean, we have quite a few versions of it. We have another version of this, not with me at the moment, but which shows a kind of the diseased plant sort of spectral profile as well.
Yeah.
There was one thing I did want to touch on that Callum brought up too. So one cool thing about having higher spatial resolution, so something that's coming off of a UAV or just a very, very high spatial resolution, is that you can start to identify individual, like, quote unquote, pure pixels. So when you're looking at a specific point on the ground, you're only looking at that plant. So if your pixels are very, very small, then you can start to just get the top of the plant. Whereas if you have really, really big pixels, you're starting to get like plant and a little bit of dirt and maybe some gravel and all sorts of stuff mixed together. So this nice green line here, this is just a really, really healthy plant, and it's just the purest pixel that you could have. This is just the plant pixel. If you started to add in dirt and other things, then it kind of gets muddled as far as what the shape is going to look like or the spectral profile. So the higher spatial resolution does allow you to get a little bit more information about the target that you're interested in. So your plant target. You're not so much interested in the plant plus the soil, you're interested in the plant or the soil. So that separation is what you're going for. And by having higher spatial resolution, it's a little easier to get at that. If you have lower spatial resolution, then you need to start to unmix your pixels. And so doing something like linear unmixing, or there's a bunch of different techniques to do it, but it gets more and more complicated, whereas higher spatial resolution just allows you to look at like, okay, I'm really just interested in this one plant. So yeah, the person that asked about the precision agriculture stuff, so a little higher spatial resolution makes the initial interpretation of the imagery easier, whereas a little lower spatial resolution usually means that yeah, it's going to be a little bit more tricky on the interpretation side. If you're trying to look at individual plants, it might be easier. If you're later in the season, you have like nice uniform crop cover, then you're just going to assume like, oh, everything's homogeneous and it's all about the same as far as the plants themselves. But yeah, early in the season, higher spatial resolution is a little easier. Later in the season, if you really want to dive into an individual plant, high spatial resolution is easier, but moderate to lower spatial resolution can also be used as well. So just wanted to pull on that a little bit.
And we do have another question from the audience here. Did you pick the bands to highlight any specific vegetation indices?
Yeah, so a few of the bands are kind of specifically targeted, advanced kind of research, whether that's in crops or in vegetation. So basically having, we have the red edge, one of the new red edge bands. So here, it's right on the shoulder of the near infrared spectrum. And having that, basically these bands allow us to kind of create indices which you've already got within, your satellite data. So it allows us to, create indices like, NCARI. I can't quite remember what that one stands for, but there's a good index page on the Harris Geospatial site, which has most of these there. You can create NDRE1, and then I think there's we've got a green band there, which lets you create a PRI index, which is, probably the most physiologically rooted index, which you can kind of generate within the visible near infrared spectrum. So, you get a lot of choices depending on what it is you're looking for.
And I know that yesterday, we did a run through of this, and you guys were talking a little bit about how it's funny, the same data, you're on different sides of dealing with it, right? So one is collection and the other is processing. I know, Austin, you were talking a little bit about just the possibilities with software, our software in particular. You were mentioning Envy.
Yeah, so yeah, on the processing side, yeah, so I'm trying to remember back exactly kind of what took us down this tangent, but I think I was asking
It was
as
me.
far it was Abby. But no, I think we were talking about data fusion and kind of bringing together, so like a tipping and queuing system that I talked about earlier, as far as like, oh, you have a satellite image and now you've captured with a much higher resolution UAV image, and you want to bring the spectra of the two together, and kind of how do you do that? And yeah, Callum was like, oh yeah, we can definitely collect that imagery. And I was like, oh, okay, on the software side, there's a bunch of different ways. So once you start building up your spectral libraries, then maybe your bands aren't the exact same spot. So you have to do some sort of interpolation to get them to be dead on. So like if you're comparing with Landsat 8, you can see in the image that Callum has, their bands are a little bit wider, or there's a couple less bands in this region, or Sentinel, their bands are a little bit different. So maybe there's another step that you would want to go beyond if you really wanted to dig into the chemical properties of what you're looking at. So yeah, on the software side, we provide a bunch of different tools, and then like as far as me kind of on the nerdy side, I like to code things up too. So like using IDL, I like to do like getting into my spectra and be like, oh, here's a nice little spline interpolation, and I can really look at this spectra here, and I can break this one apart, and like, oh, I'll just make these two line up a little bit better. So Yeah. Is that kind of what you were thinking about, Abby?
Yeah. And you know, I know that you guys were very quick to say that you're not experts with regard to COVID and the tracking of it. But one of the things that I just find interesting, you know, for anyone that's in this industry, and you, because obviously now I'm talking to you, you know, you guys are working in agriculture. All this COVID stuff going on. I mean, there has to be an impact there, just even in terms of, like, do you think that the kind of requests that you're going to get from customers and that sort of thing might change? Again, I realize it's all speculation maybe at this point, but just, you know, wondering your opinion on that. Like, what kind of things can you expect to change? And you know, what about like planting seasons, that kind of stuff? Austin?
Yeah. So I could see. So just like on the manufacturing side, like all of that is going to be slightly different just because you can't be in large groups anymore, and you have to wear safety equipment in a little bit different way. And so like all of that there will just be manufacturing things that will change. The actual planting and the harvesting and that sort of thing, that might change slightly. It might just take on a little bit different form. So I'm thinking like broadacre cereals and that sort of stuff, like the planting. There are a lot of people out in the field, but they're usually not all bunched up. They're in equipment, there's seeding, they're doing whatever they're spraying. So there's one person in a piece of machinery. So that won't change in a big way. Harvesting though, so once again on like the broadacre stuff, one guy in a machine or a few people in different machines harvesting at the same time, that might not be affected so much. But the people that are out in the field and actually like picking by hand and manipulating the actual plants by hand, that probably will change a little bit just because there's a lot of people all in one area at one time. So you want to mitigate those risks. And then I would also imagine just on the actual like thought processy side. So I feel like, at least on my end, so I'm at home now and not in an office environment. So I feel like you have a little bit more time to think through the other thoughts. So I would imagine too, there's going to be some cool ideas that are going to be coming out of this time that we all essentially going to be isolated with our own minds. And so you might start thinking through some stuff. Normally you'd be in the office and just it's reactionary, like, oh, we got to get some data about this season, and now maybe you have an extra 20 minutes, so you might be like, well, what exactly can I pull out of this information that I've been asked to get? Or maybe I can do it in a little bit different way. So there might be some like on the business side, there might be some improvements on business practices as far as production of imagery or data related analytics. And then yeah, that was like a pretty rambly answer, but I feel like you're just going to be alone a lot more and just like trapped in your own head. So you're like, what can I do better?
Wow, you make it sound so grim. That's a very grim assessment.
It's not bad. I don't mind my own head. You know, it's not bad in here. It's busy, but it's not bad.
And Callum, what about you? Are you anticipating any kind of difference in, you know, the kinds of things, you know, customers might be tasking you with to look at?
Yeah, not currently. I think, you know, depending on how long this situation goes on for, you know, we might be in a completely different space in the future. And I think maybe, you know, there could be a much greater reliance on technology like this and autonomous methods for agriculture in terms of, if the workforce is at risk and there has to be reductions or changes in practice, then I could easily see there being more emphasis placed on, better monitoring, management, and the harvesting itself.
Actually, Callum, on that kind of note, so when you're operating in a UAV, how much interaction do you have to have? Like, I know at one point the dream was for farmers to be able to like wake up in the morning and like throw it out the front window, and then it does its stuff and like comes back to them, and they don't have to do anything out in the field. Is that true? Like, if I get a MicaSense sensor and I go out in the field, like there's calibration and that kind of stuff. Can you walk us through exactly what that would look like?
Well, I've never actually been out in the field yet because I've only
all right.
But, I think it's that it certainly can probably be a pretty straightforward, easy operation in terms of, you get up, you have your sense, you take your sensor to your site, you figure out your flight pan, you get your overlap, you make sure you're going to get the speed right, and then, you go up and fly it. Obviously, I don't think you can just get up and do it on a commercial basis. You need to get the licenses and have authority to do that, I'm sure, in most scenarios. But, it's in terms of, our process, to the best of my knowledge, you have that flight plan, you have a radiometric panel, which you take a picture with the sensor. And what that does is means you can radiometrically calibrate your data after the flight to known reflectance values, which basically that means you can do temporal comparisons. So you can compare from your flight 1 to your flight 2 to your flight 3, as long as you're capturing that data. And we recommend that you take a picture before you fly with the drone. Make sure you're not standing in the way of it, or there's any shadows going on in the panel, nice clear picture. And then take a picture afterwards as well. And then, you can take whichever image from that which you consider the more, I guess, appropriate or similar to your flight conditions. You can take that. If you're a bit more advanced, we have some GitHub materials, and they kind of go over how you can interpolate between the two panels and get the values in between, basically. So you're getting a kind of consistent reflectance throughout your flight time. But that's for most applications. That's not really that necessary.
Okay. And then I know, so I've seen your little calibration panels before. It's like it's a gray panel, and it's like a 60% reflectance rate, I think, across like all your bands. And then there's also, is it still the same? Back when I was using it, it had a QR code there as well. What is that QR code for?
So the QR code is brilliant. So what that QR code does is, so we have our own kind of GitHub, open source Python software for kind of radio calibrating our images. But if you're using Pix4D, for example, or Agisoft, maybe some of the other cloud providers, I'm not sure, but for those ones, basically when you bring those images in to your software, it'll run, it'll run a character recognition essentially on that QR code. And that will basically tell you what sensor, it'll give you a sensor, and it can calculate the offset from that QR code to the actual panel, the sort of gray area of the panel where you want to get the reflectance values. And then it can automatically mask a box around it, so that when you do calibration, you just chuck your images in. If you already have loaded in the values for your panel, basically it'll find the exact area you want to get to, and then it will just go through it.
Oh, that's super cool. Okay, I thought it was like much simpler. So I know when you use your sensor, it's got like 10 different lenses on it, and then all the lenses essentially have to be like pointed at the same spot. And I thought you guys were just using a QR code because it's like, oh, it's got nice hard edges on it and stuff. It'd be easier to line them up. I didn't know it was like so in depth, like this is what the sensor is. This is exactly where the panel is. This is like, that's like a very elegant solution. That's cool.
That is actually, that's quite cool. I'm on the marketing side, but yeah, QR codes are one of those things that like always sounds like a great idea, but people tend to not do enough with it. So it's kind of like, why bother? But it's always, I like it when I can see it actually being used and used well. I think I wanted to stop for a second because I think we have another question that came in. Matria?
We do. It has one big question with a few separate questions inside. So how would seed field researchers best utilize the high spatial and spectral resolution offered by this dual camera system? Will there be any standard products generated by MicaSense besides indices? And what drone platforms has this system been validated for?
They're thinking real hard.
So in terms of the platform on which you can use these sensors on, that's, I think pretty much most fixed wings you'll be able to do. It comes with a kind of a standard mounting bracket, and DJI drones, you've got like a quick mount for it. So I know that there's also the traces and Inspire kind of line of rotary instead. That's definitely supported. And then most, like I said, most fixed wings, they're large enough size. Basically, you can take them away, and you've got the bracket which can fit. It'll work, but I couldn't go into any more specifics about models of drone, that's for sure.
And Austin?
Yeah, I was gonna say on the higher resolution portion of it. So if you're looking at, for the seed researcher, are you talking about like developing different hybrids and that sort of thing? If so, I would think that you could identify individual plants because you're low enough. You can see actual plants. You can track their growth through time. So you can see, yeah, like when, whatever you're looking at, when the first leaf comes out, second leaf, and that sort of thing. You can also start to, if you are going to be applying different inputs to it, you can track those inputs as well. So more water, more nitrogen, more like whatever, PNK, whatever you want to put on it. It just allows you to get at the individual plant level. You could also see as far as like if you planted in a straight row or whatever, and you know how many seeds you put down, then you could see how many took. Are you planting too closely together? Are your nitrogen or your nutrients being adequately separated between the plants? Are you crowding people out? Yeah, I think it's everything as far as like the way I see it, at least, it gives you an opportunity to have repeatable results, and then also see individual plants, and also it speeds up your collection times. So hopefully you could get in a rhythm where you're going to collect in the exact same way, and you could do it very, very quickly. Whereas if you were to go out and hand count every plant and do a measurement on every plant, it would be quite laborsome. So if you had a couple of different varieties you were trying out, hopefully you could fly it, and then like if you wanted to get super fancy, you could start to have some custom software to be like, okay, I'm going to do this to this row, this to this row, and this to this row. You could auto segment your rows out. You could start counting all your plants. You could put it all into a spreadsheet. Like, yeah, you could, whatever you want to do with it as far as a researcher would be concerned. But hopefully this just gives you repeatable results and speeds up your collection times is the way I would see it.
Cool. So I know we just talked about this prior to the webinar starting, and me saying like, oh yeah, no, I won't ask about this. I'll just use it as a backup or something. But actually my curiosity has killed me, and now I have to ask. So Austin, when we were talking on Monday, you had an example come up. Again, this is going back to you saying, you know, you're not an expert on the COVID thing. One of the things that you brought up, and this is just because it was fascinating to me, you had a Neil deGrasse Tyson thing that you mentioned as an example, and then today you said you actually looked into it. I want to hear about it. I want to hear all about it.
All right. So yeah. So the backstory for everyone on the call was the other day, Abby was like, oh yeah, we want to talk about COVID-19. And I was like, I know nothing about COVID-19. I was like, I saw this really cool post though, where somebody was breathing through a mask as compared to not breathing through a mask. And you could actually see like the water vapor or the heat or whatever coming out of their mouth. And you could see it kind of rolling down. And I was like, oh, it looked really cool, but it seemed really hard to figure out what it was doing. So I just kept on scrolling, and Abby was like, great, let's dig further into that. So last night I dug a little further into it. And so it's actually, yeah, it piqued my interest because it's a bit of optics coolness, but there's several different pieces to how they actually generate the image. And there's going to be some optics person out there that's be like, he butchered this. But essentially what you want to do is there's a light source with a very small aperture. So the light comes in, hits the very small aperture, essentially lines all of your light rays up into a straight line. So you have a point light source at that point. And then you pass it down to a convex mirror. The light will hit the mirror, return back. This is, yeah, you really wanted this, huh, Abby? And then it's going to hit a very, very sharp edge. So like a knife blade edge. And the light that's going to bounce back on the knife blade edge, you will block out 50% of the light, and then you will have your collection method over here. So either your eyeball or camera or whatever. And then you will have whatever you want in between, kind of at the focal point, in between this convex mirror thing coming back. And so what's going to happen is when you say breathe out, the water vapor or heat or whatever is going to come out, the light rays are going to pass through that, and they're going to be essentially deflected at different rates. So it's either going to be a little bit or a lot, depending on if the air is hot or cold or has lots of water vapor or whatever it is. And that is actually going to produce a shadow that then will be visualized, kind of a shadow that will be visualized at your camera, because the light will come through, be bounced around, and the 50% that's being blocked over here, the shadow can actually go, or the like bounced around light can go around this knife blade, whereas it would have been blocked previously. So you'd kind of see the shadow. So I can draw a diagram more, and we could talk about the speed in which the light passes through different mediums if you would like. You can also do this with a lens instead of a convex mirror. So if you have a lens that's this shaped instead of a convex mirror, you can line it up a little bit differently. You can also, instead of having your collection method down here and your light source here, you can put it in a different orientation if you have a beam splitter, because you can grab 50% of the light. See, I lost your interest. The picture was way
not at all.
cooler.
I love it. I love it. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, he would love it.
He would love it, and he'd be like, you said it wrong. It was close, but you got it wrong.
Maybe we'll get lucky and he'll insist that he come upon our little webcast so that he can, you know, set the record straight.
Ooh, that'd be cool. But it's
I doubt it.
yeah. The actual like method is called Schlieren, and it was originally like invented in the 1890s, I believe. So quite old, but it was cool. I was impressed.
Well, I'm impressed. You know, and before, you know, we start to wrap things up too, I wanted to kind of go back to Callum, because I know, you know, we were talking about the new sensor that you guys have coming out. That's out, it's available now. That data is available now, correct?
Yeah, that's out there right now.
Okay, awesome. Where do you even go to look into that?
So if you want to go look at that, just go to MicaSense.com. And today might be a slightly difficult day that we're updating our website, so if it looks strange, go back, you know, just check every so often, but we're getting a new website in today. But yeah, you go to MicaSense.com and go to the products page, and it'll be the dual camera setup.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like, and for the audience too, I think there's like a connection issue on Callum's mic, but just to reiterate, if for anything that you missed, MicaSense.com, basically. That's where you want to head out to learn more about that sensor. We had a silly question come in, I think. Do you want to maybe ask that question to Austin before we start our wrap up?
I can. Has Austin ever been in a 4G inverted dive with a MiG-28? I don't know if I pronounced all that right.
I have not. That sounds very intense. That a MiG, I believe MiG-28 is a Russian aircraft, and a 4G dive would be 4 times gravity. So, no. Why?
Because I know the guy who asked the question, because he asked questions like that, and you know, that's his thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would like to. No, I haven't. It seems intense.
So I'm going to go ahead and start to wrap up for today. I want to point it over to Matria for a bit because I want to let you know where you can find the recording of today's conversation and the recordings for past conversations. And also make sure to get the information for next week. Remember, we do new episodes every week, new panelists every week. We might have a few repeat appearances from people that we happen to think are quite interesting. Can't say what those are though yet. Next week, we are bringing on Zach Norman, one of my colleagues at L3 Harris Geospatial, and Dr. James Goodman, or just Jamie. He's going to be coming on as well. He is with High Speed Computing. So Matri, why don't you show these people the best way to find the information they need?
Absolutely. You can just head over to harrisgeospatial.com/webinars. And I'm not sure if my screen is sharing or not. There we go. So you can just go right over here and you'll be able to see the recordings from last week and from this week's episode once it's done. And then you'll have information to be able to get the details for next week.
Awesome. Everybody got that? harrisgeospatial.com/webinars. And for Callum, MicaSense.com to find out more about his magical 10 band sets. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. We're gonna keep doing these. And like I said, same promise for me every week. Eventually I'm bound to get better at this. So it's a little smoother every time. And I hope that you will continue to join us. The conversations are absolutely gonna be varied with each week, just depending on who our experts are. And I really appreciate Callum and Austin. I appreciate you getting through this with us as we kind of fumble around and figure our way through this new webinar format. I really appreciate it.
Of course, happy to be here.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it then for the day. Let's see here, any parting words? Make sure to tip your delivery drivers. In fact, over tip them like a lot. Over tip your delivery drivers, and don't hoard any more toilet paper. It's all good, it's not needed. I hope you guys have a good rest of the day, and I will talk to you next week. Thank you.